It's a little bit like that Billy Graham thing, you know. I don't want anything. So if someone asks, well, is there a personal God? Well, Paul Tillich had an interesting observation once. He was the heretic Lutheran theologian who said at one point, God must be at least personal. And what I think he meant was, we cannot reduce the ultimate to merely physical forces like gravity and electromagnetism. That if there is something alive in the universe, it's at least as big as you are. And since we call you a person, it's at least personal, but it's probably bigger than personal. And our inability to imagine something more alive than us is the failure of our imagination rather than the failure of God to be what we want God to be. If we cannot imagine something bigger than ourselves, we need to work a little harder. Third, did Jesus rise from the dead with a literal bodily resurrection? That's the same answer as the last one. I hope not. I really do. I hope not. I don't say that with any doubt. I think the odds are extravagantly long that anything like physical resurrection took place in the case of Jesus of Nazareth, in anyone's case. I know this is the miracle upon which Christians depend, or many of them do, but I don't think it's necessary. Theodore Parker, the heretic Unitarian of the 1850s, got into trouble by saying even if Jesus of Nazareth had never lived, the truth of Christianity would still be true. And his point was that the message of a life-giving, life-loving, life-perpetuating power in the universe does not depend on someone jumping up out of the ground and saying, gotcha. It just does not require that. In fact, if that's what we require to believe in something worth believing in, how little faith do we have? So I don't think it happened. But I think that the hope that life is larger than we have it in our possession is worth believing. And if that's the way some people need to feel it for a while, bless them. What do you think will happen with the institution of marriage in another 50, 100, or 200 years? These are like 700 sermons you've given me, buddy. I have no hope for marriage whatsoever. I think it's like religion. You can try to make it go away, it'll come back. You try to make it perfect, it won't be, because remember the imperfect things that we are. I would like to hope at some point it would be something we do like religion because we choose it and want it, not because we need it or are required to do it. My personal theory, and I should do a whole sermon on this, is I think the state should get out of the marriage business altogether. You think the church should get out of the marriage. I think the state should get out of the marriage business altogether. What I mean is, if there's a household of people that want to live together, and they come in all shapes and sizes, and it could be 2 guys or 2 women, or it could be 3 women, or it could be a grandparent, a child, and a great-grandparent. If there is a God, does God speak through scriptures? Yes, and through science, and through nature, and through individuals, and through hearts and minds. It speaks through the stained glass windows. It speaks in the bugs that I catch on my windshield and wish didn't have to die so I could go 70 miles an hour. It speaks through all the things that speak to us, because whatever is alive, and I think ultimately, everything is alive. There is no such thing as a non-alive thing. The stones live, the air lives, the electrons live. It's all alive, every last bit of it. And that means God is in the midst of that, because what is God if not life? That which lives, continues to live, and continues to insist on living, that lives and lives and lives even when individually we cannot anymore because we're worn out. That which brought us into life, takes us out of it, continues. So the whole of the universe speaks of life at every turn, which is what leads me to the next question. Someone asked me to explain Pascal's wager. You ever heard of Pascal's wager? This is old-fashioned probability thinking, or shall we say game theory. You know game theory? Figure out whether or not to join a game. And in Pascal's wager, Pascal said it's always better to believe in God, because here's the deal. If you do believe in God and there is one, you're set. If you believe in God and you don't, and there isn't a God, what have you lost? On the other hand, if you believe in God and there isn't a God, oh well. But if you don't believe in God and there is a God, bad news. And I take issue with Pascal. I think he makes an assumption that I do not. He assumes that anything that could be called God cares whether I believe in it or not. And I use this argument very simply, and I've made this argument to you before. Whether you know it or not, there are 4 trillion microbes living in you right now. And they don't know you're there. They don't believe in you, they don't disbelieve in you, they're not praying to you, they're not doing anything that has to do with you personally, and yet they completely depend upon you to live. On the other hand, I'm thinking, you're not thinking either, you know? There's an Escherichia coli under my fingernail that doesn't like me. I got to get rid of that son of a gun. You're not thinking about them either, and isn't that fine? So if I am not worried about what the microbes in my body think of me, why would we imagine any God worth believing in would be doing the same about me either? God is not in the business. No God worth believing in is going to waste any divine time over what you think of God. Just not going to happen. So, what I'm trying to tell you is Pascal made a false wager. Believe, don't believe. Whether God exists or not won't affect the outcome. Either we're all going, well, I should say this. Whatever lies ahead, everyone's going no matter what. If there's something, you'll be there too. If there's nothing, everyone else will be there along with you. So it seems to me that you should only think about God if it helps you be alive now. If it helps you be a person now. The only reason to believe in God is if it helps you be a better person. Someone posed an ethical dilemma. Thinking about world hunger makes the person is worried, and it's a very long question, so I'm going to have to redact it a bit. The dilemma for me is the conflict between wanting to help and the logical fact that if we feed all these people, they'll have more people, and then suddenly the planet will be growing even faster. See what I mean? Both hunger and satisfaction accrue throughout our lives, and we're not exempt. And feeding the hungry will ironically only make more people who want more food. 2 hungry people, if fed, will reproduce and create more hungry people, and so on and so forth, until we all starve. But if you starve a few, isn't that just as wrong, et cetera, et cetera? Well, again, like Mr. Pascal, there's an assumption here that needs to be challenged. Do hungry people reproduce more or less than satisfied people? And the reality is that in countries that get enough to eat, they have fewer children. Just look around. Where is everyone? They all had breakfast. They stayed home. The reality is that in what we call developed countries or non-poverty stricken countries or non-hungry societies, the fertility rate actually goes down, in part because human beings have other resources. The problem in very poor countries with not enough food is that children are the only renewable resource over which they have control. And so they have lots of them. Because some of them will grow up, some of them will die, they will provide some help. But if you know you have other forms of security, not only family, but neighborhood and nation, water, food, shelter, the drive to have more children actually goes down. So ironically, questioner, the more people we feed, better. The fewer people will reproduce, and the healthier everyone will be. So relax. Feed as many children as you can get a hold of. It's good for everyone, including you. I saved one question for last. It came from a young person, a child. And it's the most profound question I ran into the whole bloody week. Great with kids. They cut right through the slack. No, they cut through the muck. They don't ask about gods or salvation or resurrection or world hunger. The question is, why do we have to go to church? That's a question. God bless. And the answer is, you don't have to go to church. There are only actually 3 or 4 people that have to go to church. Me, Marilyn, the building guy, maybe a few others, because we get paid. The rest of you, it's purely voluntary. Like I said, see how few of you there are? The question is, why should you go to church? Well, I'm going to tell you, it's not a problem from God's perspective. Like I said, God is not counting butts and seats. And what's more, I'm not either. Archbishop Temple of the Anglican Church years ago said something I have quoted to you before, that we're gravely mistaken to think that God is at all interested in religion. God is interested in you living your life. And so, church only matters if it helps you live your life. I made the point this morning to the young man who offered the question last week, and he was at the early service. Do you ever belong to a little league team? He said, yeah. So when you go to play, you just go to the games. You don't go to the practices, right? He said, no, you have to go to practice too. I said, that's why you go to church. Church is the practice field of life. It's where you go when you need a coach to say, no, you have to you have to choke up on the bat a little bit, or no, here's how you slide. It's where we go to get better at being alive. And just like going to practice, or if you're a piano player having to play scales over and over again, or if you have to do your homework, it's boring. It should be boring. I don't want you to live here. I want you to say, thank God that's over. Let me go out and get back to my life, because I want you to be out there in the world living better, not in the church living better. If you spend all your time, if you spend your whole life at church, you need a better life. But if you spend none of your time at church, you won't have much of a life either. So the trick is how much. I have a very specific prescription. How much church do you need? About 3% of your life needs to be about your church. I'm not kidding. 3%. That doesn't include Sundays, by the way. That's your choice. You need to be giving about 3% of your life to practicing your faith in a deliberate way. In a deliberate way, not an accidental way. Not to Fountain Street Church, although I would love it if you would. 3%, that's the investment if you make it in the deliberate effort to live conscientiously and consciously. That will make your life and no one else's life. It will make your life a living life, not a non-living life. It will make your life real like the Velveteen Rabbit and not just a toy thing. So I want you to think, can I invest 3% of my life in my faith? 3%. That's all it really takes. You don't even have to tithe to get a benefit. So that's what I'm asking you this morning. Having asked these questions, I'll ask you a question. How much of your life is worth your faith? Are you willing to give 3% of who you are to get a 97% improvement on your being? People in Wall Street can't give you anywhere near that, but I can absolutely promise that if you give 3% of your life to the practice of being faithful to what matters most, to asking the questions that won't take easy answers, to being frail when people tell you to be strong, to being hurt when you'd rather be closed in, to being hopeful when the world wants you to give up. Are you willing to give 3% of yourself to doing that even when it's hard and boring? That's the question I'm asking you. I can tell you, I have done it. My life is not all that great. But I'm alive every day. So you get a choice. You can have a great life every now and then, but nothing else. Or you can be really alive a lot and feel kind of sucky a little bit too. Choose life. Choose life. See you next week when all the work will be about the fun when we play the piano. But I'd like you to sing with me even though it's late. See what happens. You give me questions. I can't make myself behave. But you're sweet, sweet people to put up with me right now. I'm really delighted. And let me say one last time, because this is the best time to tell you, thank you. Thank you for letting me walk my walk with you again. I hope we can do it a number of other times. Shall we sing together?